Hola, this is Maya with the third installment in my Fallout Day cookery videos. It's been an absolute blast, pun intended. Thank you for tuning in as we try something new and different, and huge thanks to Bethesda for sponsoring this series of videos. If you want more, let them know. You know where the comment section is. This Jell-o cake from the Fallout TV series is an absolute monster. 5 layers, 2 of cake and 3 of Jell-o, plus a whole lot of icing. It's super tasty in a very simple, old-fashioned slice of Americana kind of way, and the components are pretty simple to make. The trick is decorating it and assembling it so it won't tip over. Jell-o loves to slip and slide around, so getting 3 layers to stay stacked on top of one another was a challenge. Making the Jell-o layers couldn't be easier. Best practice is to oil the molds first, so they just slide out when they're done. But other than that, you literally just mix the powder with a bit of boiling water, stir it up until all the crystals are dissolved, and then add cold water, pour into the mold, and wait for it to set. All this will be on the pack, depending on the product you buy, and don't worry if the specific brand Jell-o isn't available where you live. There are countless products that work in the same kind of way. I actually doubled the amount of powder suggested to make sure the jellies were a bit more robust. We'll be very glad of that later. Leave them in the fridge for 4 hours or ideally overnight. Now for the cake. Get 5 eggs and 300 grams of butter, both at room temperature, plus some extra butter for greasing. There's nothing more heartbreaking than your beautiful cake sticking to the tin and tearing, so grease the bottom and sides thoroughly. Then line it with a sheet of baking paper just on the bottom and grease that too with butter, oil, or spray like I'm using. Preheat the oven to 180 degrees centigrade. Get the eggs into a mixing bowl with the self-raising flour, caster sugar, butter, vanilla, and a teaspoon of baking powder. Use a whisk to bring it all together. This is the reason we want room temperature ingredients. If the butter is cold, it won't cream properly and won't create that lovely, fluffy texture, and you'll just get flakes of butter instead. And if the eggs are fridge cold, you won't get as much volume out of them when they're whipped, and your cake will be flat and sad. Cold eggs would also cool down the mixture significantly when we start working with it. We don't want that. So pro tip, make your life easier and use room temperature eggs and butter. Whisk for about 5 minutes or until the cake batter is pale and fluffy. Once finished, I added a spoonful of colored sprinkles for a bit of fun, but also because the cake on the TV show clearly has some patches of color inside it. Mix those in and you're done. I then scooped it into a piping bag to create a super even and uniform layer of cake in the tin. This is a trick which has worked great for me in the past, but of course, you don't need to pipe it. You can just spoon it in, but I know this cake is going to have to support multiple layers of slippery Jell-o, so I need it to be as even and flat as possible. I also made a slight well in the middle of the batter, because cakes like this have a tendency to dome as they bake, and again, we need it to be flat. This cake tin is about 20 centimeters squared, which doesn't sound like a lot, but remember, it's going to be tall, and the bigger it gets, the harder it will be to manage that wobble and to get all the layers sized correctly. Bake in the oven for about 25 to 30 minutes until it's golden brown on top. The timings are never exact. The best way to check that your cake is done is to insert a skewer right into the middle, and if it comes out clean with no wet batter on it, you're done. If it's not clean, wait a few more minutes. Just don't open the oven at all for the first 25 minutes, or your cake won't rise. Time to make the buttercream icing. Get 350 grams of softened butter, throw it in a bowl, and beat it into submission until it's very soft. Add 700 grams of icing sugar with a tablespoon of milk or warm water, and keep beating to incorporate everything until the mixture is creamy and smooth. If the result feels a little too thick for you to work with, beat in a little more milk or water to loosen it. This is quite a lot of icing, but it's a big cake and we need to ice the inside, outside, and decorate the layers. If your cake is significantly smaller or larger, then go ahead and adjust. Jell-o is set, cake is baked, icing is ready. This next part is actually simpler than it might look. Get yourself a board or stand on which to serve the cake. Make sure the layers are level and straight, then start with a dollop of icing in the middle of the board and put the first layer on top. This is a neat little trick for avoiding slippage. Cover the bottom layer with icing, then add the upper layer on top. Now cover the entire cake with icing, top and sides. Try to get this first layer as smooth and uniform as you can. Do one side at a time, work as fast as you can, and don't freak out if it looks messy. Buttercream is supposed to have a rough and organic look. If there are any really wonky areas, or bits where the cake itself is uneven or showing through the icing, just do a second layer around those areas until you're happy that it's more or less straight. One of my piping bags has a little yellow food coloring mixed in for decorating the cake. You'll want to use a star nozzle, not a tiny one, but small enough for the rosettes to add definition to the cake. Generally speaking, smaller rosettes look neater, but will also make any mistakes more obvious, so that it requires greater care and precision. The trick with piping is to use one hand for guiding. That's the one closest to the nozzle. Never squeeze with this hand. Just use it for aiming, and always squeeze with the other hand, which is cradling the bag from the back. Place the nozzle so it's almost touching the cake, then a little squeeze, then release the pressure and pull back. Done! Take your time. Outlining the cake like this along the bottom, the top, and all the edges makes it look very square and defined, so any unevenness won't really be noticeable. It's also pretty. To release the Jell-o from the mold, use your finger to gently push the edges away from the mold all the way around. This will start to release it and help give you a sense of how stuck it is. Tip it around and keep testing the sides. And if you feel a lot of resistance or you feel like the bottom of the mold isn't going to release, dip the very bottom of it in hot water, just for a second at a time to loosen it. Then try again. If your molds were clean and properly oiled, the Jell-o really should just slide out. Carefully add the first red Jell-o layer. This is where you'll be glad for the more robust double powder mix. It's much easier to pick up and manipulate without fear of breaking it. Add the remaining 2 layers, take a moment to make sure they're not going anywhere, and then ice these layers as well with plain white icing this time. The cake on the TV show looks like it might have whipped cream around the Jell-o, but there's no way that would work. It would just slide off instantly. This is the thing with recreating food from film and TV. What we see on screen often isn't food at all. Photographers use things like shaving foam as a stand-in for whipped cream all the time because it has to last multiple takes under hot studio lighting. I am not going to use shaving foam because I actually plan to eat this cake. So this is one of those times where we just have to approximate what the dish looked like on camera. The icing looks beautiful, plus it seems to help keep the Jell-o in place. Although the moment you slice into it, you can expect the whole thing to start collapsing, but that's fine. This is definitely a party cake with that incredible presentation and all that icing. And like most things Fallout, it's very old school in an over-the-top sort of way, reflecting a crazy overblown version of mid-century Americana. So it is very sweet, but actually the Jell-o really helps balance that out. And the sponge cake itself is delicious. Also a mix of textures as well. I was really pleasantly surprised at how well it works, not just visually, but on the plate. And if you like the sound of this, but don't want such a large project, or don't have a household that can realistically get through a cake of this size, you can make mini cupcake versions using exactly the same recipes. I gotta say, these also worked really well, especially the layered Jell-o. Super cute and much easier to deal with. So next time you have fellow vault dwellers over for dinner, you know what to make for dessert. Thanks to me, Maya, NinjaPulse, and Bethesda. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't seen my recipes for Nuka-Cola, Ice Cream Float, and Nuka-Cola Quantum, go check them out. All are real recipes you can make at home and which taste amazing while staying super faithful to the in-game versions. That's going to be it for this video. Once again, I'm Maya, this is NinjaPulse. Thanks for watching.